Well, first of all, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Mike Neal, President and CEO of the Tulsa Regional Chamber. For those of you that are accustomed to joining us for these past forums in person, we're delighted that you made time to join us virtually today. This is your first Chamber Congressional Forum. Let me be the first to welcome you and thank you for joining us today. It's our privilege to provide this audience today for one of our outstanding state leaders, U.S. Senator James Lankford. The senator is an incredibly gifted leader, a speaker, and a true friend to the Tulsa, Northeast Oklahoma region. He's been that way since he first entered Congress, and he's been a true champion. He and his staff work with our governmental affairs team on a daily basis and do an outstanding job representing all of us in the business community as well as the citizens of our state. We look forward to hearing his insights today. He's one who's been very heavily involved from a congressional perspective from day one in regard to this COVID-19 pandemic, and has been very heavily engaged in all of the congressional actions leading up to where we stand today. And so we'll be collecting questions submitted through Zoom chat. So if you've got questions, please feel free to submit those, and we'll take up as many of those as we can following the senator's remarks. But before we formally introduce the senator, I want to take this quick opportunity to thank our sponsors of our Congressional Forum series. Sponsors are Cherokee Nation Businesses and the Robson Companies. Our silver sponsor is Spirit Aerosystems. Our legislative benefactors are AT&T, American Airlines, Community Care, Grand River Dam Authority, Public Service Company of Oklahoma, Quick Trip, TRC Pipeline Services, and Tulsa Tech. I'll now pass the microphone over to Joe Robson, founder and president of the Robson Companies, who will formally introduce the senator. Joe? Joe, have we unmuted you? Joe, if you'll unmute yourself.
Got it. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Mike. It's an honor to join everybody today. Senator James Lankford, as you mentioned, began his public service with 4 years in the House of Representatives, representing the 5th District of Oklahoma. He was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2014 for the unexpired term of the retiring late Senator Tom Coburn, and then reelected again for a full 6-year term in November of 2016. He serves on the Senate Committee on Finance, the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, the Committee on Appropriations, and the Committee on Indian Affairs. And just a personal note, Mike, you touched on it. I just can't think of anybody representing Oklahoma with the personality and the knowledge that Senator Lankford has to represent us today. And I just appreciate his thoughtful voice and his common sense approach on very complicated issues. And with that, Senator Lankford, I appreciate you joining us today.
Joe, thanks, Mike, as well. Thank you very much. Glad to be able to join you. Let me make just a brief comment, and let's jump into questions because I know people will have specific questions. As you know, the Paycheck Protection Program was extended today. It opened up at 9:30. Promptly, the entire system froze up on a lot of folks as people from all over the country were dropping in data. As odd as this sounds, Todd Young and I from Indiana worked on this a long while back. We're talking 2 weeks ago, which is a long time based on the COVID-19 stuff. When we saw what was happening, we encouraged SBA to be able to keep their E-Tran system open so we wouldn't have a moment like this. They didn't, we did, and that's our frustration right now. They'll get it unwound at this point, but it's just thousands of users hitting it at the same time with hundreds of thousands of requests on it. This is what happens in a system like this. So the E-Tran system and the Paycheck Protection Program will get back up. When it does, the focus is $310 billion going out to small businesses and not-for-profits 500 or less. We did 1.7 million businesses with the first tranche that went out. About $4.5 billion of that came to Oklahoma, which is a very significant amount, which speaks very well of our community banks and credit unions and lending institutions that they really worked very hard, because the first round of this was a paperwork nightmare to be able to get everything through, because there were so many technicalities and problems, just like we're experiencing day one of the second round. To put it in perspective, the law was passed, signed. 7 days later, it started with the lending. That's unheard of in government speak, to be able to have a $350 billion program that goes from signature to implementation 7 days later. Now we're 3 weeks after that. There's a relaunch of it. Again, there'll be some bumps. I think there'll be fewer than there were the first time, but they'll get that word out. This covers 8 weeks of pay for their employees. It covers some utilities and some of the lease costs as well. So it's a significant change. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, what's called the EIDL loan program from SBA, that is also reopened. That is directly through the Small Business Administration. So you've got the paycheck protection. You go to a bank, credit union, lending institution directly to be able to do that. You go to sba.gov directly to do the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. They're also recharging that and getting all those out as fast as they can. That's a longer process, only because it has a narrower funnel to be able to go through. That is the SBA system. Again, to give you a perspective on this, during the first tranche of this, the Small Business Administration did more loans in 14 days than they had done the previous 14 years combined. So when we talk about, having some difficulties and struggles in this, it's pushing everybody through it. The big challenge that we have right now is unemployment. That's obviously a federal state individual business partnership to be able to fund unemployment insurance. That was dramatically changed with the CARES Act for a short-term basis. I did a couple of things that added additional weeks for people that their weeks had run out. Let's say they went into unemployment in September of last year. They'd gone all the way through, their unemployment is running out. This extended it a little while for them, so they wouldn't run out during this time period, because obviously it's going to be very few jobs that can hire them right now to be able to get through that. There was also an extension to be able to allow contractors, gig employees, let's say Uber drivers, Uber Eats, Lyft, whatever it may be, those folks to also be able to get unemployment. They typically would not be able to do that, nor would self-employed or contractors. This time period allows them to be able to do that. That took a pretty dramatic shift in the system for our state unemployment insurance system. They got that up and running by the end of last week. They did about 100,000 people they processed last week. So that took a little time. I would tell you that's one of the challenges we'll have long-term for our state. Our state unemployment system was first put into use, the software itself, in 1987. It has not significantly changed. It is still a COBOL system running on a mainframe computer in the Oklahoma Economic Security Commission. So OESC is still running a software package from 1987. Not many other people are doing that other than Mike Neal's home system. So there's just not a lot of software systems that are out there. We've got to be able to fix that, but that's a state issue. I would tell you we're way behind on that, except I think if I remember the number right, we're the 12th state to be able to get up our unemployment to be able to make that change. That means the vast majority of other states are struggling even more than our state, because all of these systems are old and out of date for the states. They run one thing, and there's just no need to be able to make a change until you get in a moment like this and you suddenly realize, yeah, if you need to be able to adapt, if you've got an old COBOL system, it's not going to run that way. So that's a long-term issue on it. The big challenge we have is the extra $600 per week that's going into unemployment. Let me just make a quick comment on that, because I've had a lot of business folks that have expressed some frustration over that. I'm going to pull the curtain back a little bit and talk about this. When we first started talking about the unemployment system and wanting to be able to provide an additional amount, the reason for that was you're going to have a lot of people going into unemployment that have not been to unemployment. They're not prepared for it, and there's going to be a tremendous number. So the goal was, could we increase what they receive a percentage? And to say, let's do a percentage increase for each person, not to make them whole, but a percentage increase for folks. The answer to back on that was no. The state unemployment systems could not do a percentage increase on it. Literally, their software would not be able to manage that. They could do a certain dollar amount of increase, but not a percentage. That would be true of our old system from 1987 and a lot of other states as well. So then the conversation was, what's that dollar amount? We had proposed a $200 increase. Now this group knows me to know enough. I don't get into a lot of partisan conversations. but I'm just telling you what happened. We had proposed, Republicans in the Senate, because the Senate was driving this dialogue, had proposed $200 additional would go into each check. Democrats said they wanted to do $1,000 per check for each person per week in addition on that. Then you see where the compromise ended up at $600 per week. There was a lot of complaints even at $600 per week because we knew that would exceed what a lot of people's normal average income was for those months of time period and be very difficult to be able to get people to come back to work when the economy actually regains. That the only real promise of it is a paycheck, basically long-term on it. My Democratic colleagues wanted to be able to extend this additional money all the way through December 31 of this year. We ended up agreeing on July the 31st. So that was a shorter time period and a lower amount than what they wanted. It was a higher amount than what we wanted and a long period. We wanted to end on June the 30th, again, trying to be able to predict at the time when we might get to the end of COVID-19 and have greater employment issues. All of it was a guess. Remember, this was mid-March when this was actually occurring. The situation on the ground was very different at that time, but I'm glad to be able to talk about that. That additional $600 per week has proved to be a problem, as we thought it might be. There are some issues with individuals saying, hey, I want to go to unemployment. My conversation with the Oklahoma Economic Security Commission has been, are they assuring people that you can't just quit and to go into unemployment? The rules are still the same. Their response has been, yes, we have the exact same rules for unemployment. You can't just quit. You can't just say, I'll make more on unemployment, and so I want to be able to do that. You have to actually be laid off to be able to do that, or be released from your job to have that, or to be able to go on furlough where the company is still maintaining your health care, but they put you on furlough where you don't have pay. The problem is they're processing thousands and thousands of people a week. Are there exceptions to that? I'm sure there are. And so that's going to be the challenge, to just be able to unwind that for a little while. To give you an average figure, and a lot of people have seen this, on a average week, the Oklahoma Economic Security Commission would process about between 1,400 and 1,700 claims in a week for the entire state. They've had several weeks, they processed 45,000 of those over the last couple of weeks. So the numbers are enormous. If you take a really big month in the United States, a really big dramatic month for unemployment, it'd be about 2.5 million people in a month filing for unemployment. We had last month 22 million people filing for unemployment. So 10 times what a really big dramatic month would be for unemployment. So the numbers are enormous, and a lot of additional people making decisions in the process and being able to process as fast as they can. There will certainly be some inefficiencies and some mistakes in the process. The main goal right now is to get things stabilized for individuals that are literally trying to be able to pay rent, buy groceries. That was the $1,200 that was going out to families to be able to do the gap, because we have just so many millions of people that they really have nothing to be able to sustain them during this time period. So the goal was to be able to have something to be able to help sustain them, and this as quickly as possibly could. So let me take some questions. Let's go through the issues and see what thoughts you may have, and I'll try to fill in the gaps on anything else you're interested in.
Well, first of all, Senator, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for all you've done these past 2 months, certainly this past month and a half, fighting through all this. Your efforts are you to be applauded for your bipartisan efforts and working with your colleagues to, and you and the Oklahoma delegation have done a great job, and we can't thank you enough on behalf of the business community for your efforts there. A couple of questions that we've had pre-submitted, and we've got some others that are coming in via the chat. If you've not submitted your chat question, please feel free to do so. We'll take those up. But Senator, we've seen a great deal of criticism regarding our nation's immediate response to the pandemic and whether President Trump acted quickly enough. What are the critics getting right, and what are they wrong about?
All right, it's a great question. I think I got it. Mike, you're kind of skipping in and out a little bit right now, so I hope I got it. What I heard was, the question was, what was the president right about? What were they wrong about? Was the government, federal side, what right and wrong about on the early stages of the COVID-19 hangover? That's allergies, by the way. Just so you know, I'm sitting on the back porch. It's a great place to be able to be. So earliest days of the things the president did right. He closed down the border with China early. And I know he talks about that a lot, but that really was a risky conversation. We think about it now and think no big deal. But when he shut down the border with China, and then later he shut down the border with Europe, That at the time, he took a for that in the national media saying overreacting. It's because he's an isolationist. He's trying to keep everybody out. He took a lot of heat based on that, but it was the right decision to be able to do. The challenge was when the president said that we should close down the border with China. At the same time, the World Health Organization was saying China has this contained. Just a week before that, the World Health Organization had said we're not even sure this is human to human transmission. This could be animal to human transmission, and there's just a lot of it going on. And so it was a really murky time to be able to get information. One of the big challenges we had with the World Health Organization at the time, the United States tried to be on the team that went into China with the World Health Organization in the earliest days. China and the World Health Organization blocked out the Americans on that team and would not allow us to be able to join, to be able to see for ourselves what was happening in December and in early January. That really set us back. Now, should our government have pressed harder and said, no, we're not going to allow this unless we've got Americans on the team? Hindsight would say yes at this point. We wish we would have been allowed to be on the team, but the Chinese government and the World Health Organization just gave us the initial, no, you're not needed, you're not welcome on this team to be able to see it. There's a lot of second guessing on the testing. Obviously, South Korea did a lot of testing very rapidly. They chose to be able to get up a fast test. They purchased a lot of the testing supplies around the world and got those quickly. That put a lot of us behind. One of the big gaps that we didn't see before, but we see clearly now, is our supply chain. Most of our PPE that our healthcare providers use is manufactured in China. So in January, when they were at their peak in China with COVID-19, China wouldn't allow the transport out of their country, this PPE. They basically claimed all of it and said, though you're manufacturing it for supply warehouses in the United States, you can't ship it. We need it all here. They kept it all. That put them behind. Clearly, if they're manufacturing in China, that kind of lightweight, they're going to ship it over by boat. So they're supposed to ship it out in January, arrive to us in February, early March, hit all the warehouses and be ready for distribution. We were very, very behind on PPE nationwide, where our hospitals and our local healthcare providers have a few days worth of PPE in storage, but they don't have massive amounts in storage because they know if I need more, I can just contact my supplier and they'll ship more to me. Well, that works unless everyone in the globe is trying to get the same thing. And a lot of it's manufactured in China, and China's not releasing it because they're using the majority of it. So it was a snowball effect on that. We also learned pretty quickly that some of the PPE that was in the national storehouse, they had not kept up with the expiration dates. So they had some of the PPE, N95 masks and other things, that have an expiration date, just like medicines do and just like other materials do. It had expired. And so it delayed, how long can you use it past expiration? It's a physical option. It's not a liquid. It's not something else. Is it still actually still good? Does it still meet the criteria, even though it's expired? That slowed down. So we learned a lot about expiration. We learned a lot about supply chains and about just-in-time delivery for critical materials that we can't trust that. We've learned a lot about World Health Organization and engagement there. HHS has been very slow. There were no formulas in place to be able to distribute funds to the hospitals. We have given them $175 billion to be able to distribute to Medicare and Medicaid suppliers. They've been very slow getting that out the door. They were not prepared to be able to do that. So there are lots of areas that we learned. Education released their funds very quickly. HHS has been very slow. IRS has learned they're pretty decent at receiving checks. It's much harder for them to send checks. And so it's a whole different system there. So there'll be a 9/11 type commission at the end of this to be able to do a total look over everything. Kirsten Sinema and I are actually working on a bill dealing with the regulatory issues. There were a lot of waiving of different regs over the last month. We want to look at, okay, from here forward, what regulations do we need to re-examine for a moment like this when it comes again? Because we will someday, unfortunately, have a moment like this again that we need to evaluate what regulations need to be reformed so that we can better manage these moments and continue to give input, but to turn things around. So I know it's a long answer. There's just a lot going on with it to be able to evaluate what worked and what didn't work.
Sure. Thank you, Senator. You referenced in your introductory comments, you talked about the Paycheck Protection Program and how popular it's been. first of all, let me say thank you for the action of your colleagues in the Senate, your colleagues in the House, for passing another round of a very critically needed round of funding last week. What is your sense as to how long this new funding that just opened up today, how long do you think that round of funding will last? Do you or your colleagues have any feel for that?
No one really knows. I would expect it would last 10 days. That's my guess, what it will last. We've got about 350 billion in the first round, 310 billion in the second round. Did 1.7 million companies the first time. I would expect we would do about that many this time. That is for-profit, not-for-profits, and faith-based nonprofits, all included in that number. So it's quite a few individuals. By the way, there's been a lot of conversation about big companies that slipped into that have access to the market. That's a relatively small, like a fractional amount of companies. The vast majority of the companies that are in it have about 18 employees or less. It really is true, actual small businesses that are in it that had no access to other capital or other way to be able to get through this. So the vast majority of those were done by community banks and by smaller credit unions, and the vast majority were done to very small businesses in the first round. I would expect that would be so in the second round as well.
Thank you, Senator. In line with the popularity of the Paycheck Protection Program, what other federal assistance programs are there out there maybe that aren't quite getting the degree of attention maybe that PPP or that EIDL has been receiving that businesses should be attempting to take advantage of?
Yeah, the EIDL program is the next big one that's out there. We did about an additional $60 billion for that program, which again is a very significant amount. EIDL is an existing program. It was expanded during this one to also allow faith-based nonprofits and nonprofits to be able to use the economic injury disaster loan. They typically could not do that, but they can during this time period as well. So that's an expansion of that program. But that gives some capital up to $2 million for groups to be able to take out, to be able to help them get inventory, to be able to get up to speed with what they need on products and such. We've had quite a few folks say, Paycheck Protection, I'd like to be able to get that loan, but it's good to be able to keep our employees paid, but I can't restart my business. So that's what the EIDL loan is designed, and you can do both. There was some controversy at the very beginning. If you could, you can absolutely do both of those. The other one's going to be the Main Street lending. That is a part of what the Treasury and the Federal Reserve call the 13-3 facility. This is a larger pool of money. A lot of folks have said that's only for the largest businesses. It's actually not true. The Main Street lending piece could be any size business. Now, we expect mostly large businesses to take it, but any size business could actually take that. That's a low interest, low collateral loan that you could get, and that's called the Main Street lending. We also have information on our website on that as well. By the way, there's also a payroll deduction for your taxes. If you maintain your payroll, you get 50% off the cost of that payroll in your taxes for 2020. So that's another piece we've got a link to on our website as well. There are some businesses that are saying, I've got enough capital, I can make it through this. It's going to be difficult. I don't want to take out the Paycheck Protection Program or an EIDL or something else. I've got enough cash saved up to be able to do it and be able to get through it. But they can also get this payroll credit to be able to help them through that process as well. So check out the payroll tax credit as well.
Great. Thank you, Senator. I'm going to now go to our governmental affairs team and Connor Carroll for some of our questions that have come in from the live chat. Connor?
We've had some great questions, so if you have any further ones, feel free to drop them in that chat window. To start us off, I thought this one was great with your cybersecurity focus that you've brought to light for the state, for sure. So with so many working from home over the past several weeks, our workforce has been operating outside of traditional cybersecurity infrastructure. Can you tell us what you're seeing in terms of targeted cybersecurity threats?
Yeah, so I can't tell you everything we're going to see on that, but let me tell you just a couple of things. One is this has been an enormous push for companies to be able to have virtual private networks, to be able to have access, to have computer systems, to not know where their employees, what kind of system that they're going to have at their home. So the security issue is dramatically increased during that time period. I don't have to tell anybody that's on this webinar that. You know it full well. It is an area that I would say continue to be able to strengthen. If you found you didn't have what you needed during this time period, when we get on the other side of this, go back and get it, develop it, because we'll have other moments that we'll have to be able to deal with this in the future. On the social media, on the influence side of things, I can talk about some of the things we've seen there. Iran, China, and Russia especially have put out products that they put into the social media world, trying to be able to destabilize where we are as a country and to be able to blame the United States for the beginning of COVID-19. I think that's why you saw the president about 2 weeks ago really dial up the rhetoric on China, because China was in the process of trying to be able to push the blame through all these social media sources to say this COVID-19 was secretly created by the United States military, it was in a test lab, or that the military planted it in China to try to kill Chinese citizens, or this was released inadvertently. I mean, it was some of the craziest things ever out there, but the Chinese were actually, as a government, pushing some of these things and getting them into our American social media to try to destabilize the messaging. Russia always does this, 100%. That's their mode. If there's any moment to be able to destabilize anybody, they try to take advantage of that every time. But Iran was also doing that as well during this time period. So we have to stay attentive to the messaging and the information that we get online. If you see something, even if it says ABC, CBS, NBC, doesn't necessarily mean it actually is from them. It could have been a slide created to look like something from ABC News, but it's actually something that's created by a foreign government, is now spreading around the internet. Go to original sources to be able to get information. That's one of the key aspects. And I would encourage you, if you don't have a virtual private network to be able to set up for your business in the days ahead, get that set up, because that will be a significant resource long term. I fully expect a lot of businesses to reevaluate their teleworking, and then in the days ahead to say maybe there are more positions that we want to have teleworking or have greater flexibility for some families, or to be able to have a perk in our company to say, hey, in certain times, in certain jobs, we're going to allow you to be able to telework certain days of the week as an employment perk to try to attract people. It's a very valid issue. Obviously, that's been tested out in mass right now, but we've got to be able to maintain the security apparatus when we do that.
Senator, what do you think may be included in a fifth coronavirus relief package? Some have asked, what will we do once the Paycheck Protection Program runs out of funding again? What's left for businesses after that?
It's a great question. There's no good answer to that, and let me tell you why on it. I'm headed back to DC the 4th of May. The House and the Senate both are scheduled to begin again. We will probably begin again without staff, just like the last week we were in session. We didn't have any staff that was in the building. It was just the members, and we all met in an enormous conference room where we could spread out across the room, still be in the same room, but keep a real distance from each other. I would expect that's how we would begin again next week. There's already been a lot of dialogue about what the next package would be. I would tell you that the main concern is really twofold. One is we don't want to miss anything. We're coming through an incredibly difficult time. We've got to be able to take out the loans to get through the storm that we can. But the second part of it's key as well. Just like we're taking out a loan, if your home or business is damaged by a storm, you've got to pay that loan off at the end of it. All of the money that's out there right now, we sold bonds and treasury bills and such, and that people are buying these from around the world and around the United States to put in their retirement portfolio, whatever it may be. There is a limited amount that you can do like that. We did $2.5 trillion in 30 days. That's an enormous amount of money to be able to put out there in additional debt. So we're trying to be attentive to that, to say at the end of this, we've got to be able to pay for things. So there, for instance, there's been conversation to say, let's do a $2 trillion infrastructure package. That conversation started 2 years ago. That's still out there to say on the next big CARES package, let's do an infrastructure piece as well. I've said to that time out, we do need to do an infrastructure package. It was already on schedule to do it this fall, but we need to pay for it. We need to figure out what's going to be the revenue stream to be able to do this. We can't do another $2 trillion in debt and to think this doesn't have a long-term effect. So whatever we're doing on the next piece needs to focus on what we missed from the first one, what it takes to sustain us through this, and then to look for what things we're going to pay for at the end. Again, the goal was never, the goal of the CARES Act was never to make businesses and families whole. It was to get us through this. There are some that are saying, hey, not all of my expenses have been paid through the CARES Act. I'm aware of that. That was never the goal. It's like unemployment insurance wasn't originally designed to be able to make people whole. It was designed to be able to get them through it. That's been the challenge on unemployment during this time period, that we have a disincentive to get back to work. If the goal is just to be able to continue to have more and more federal debt and to make every business whole, that doesn't get us back to our economy running again. And we've got to do that as well.
We have plenty of great questions that we'd love to ask you. We'll be sure to send them over to you so you can maybe get us some answers on them. But we're limited on time right now, so I'm going to pass it back to Joe
let me do
Robson.
faster answers too.
Yeah. Okay.
Connor, we have time for one more from you.
Okay. We can take one more. Let's see. So, there have been some reports of agricultural producers and farmers with surpluses that they can't bring to market. Is this affecting producers in Oklahoma, and what can be done at the federal level to ensure products are not destroyed but used for folks in need, like at food?
Yeah, it's a great. Yep. So that's a great question on that. There's $19 billion has been given to the Department of Agriculture. They're using $3 billion of that to be able to purchase commodities, to be able to get them to food banks directly. The challenge that we have right now is, especially with animals, they have a certain weight, certain size. Let's say for hogs, certain weight, certain size. That's when they have to be harvested. If there's no ability to be able to actually harvest them, then you're stuck at that point, and you can't continue to be able to harvest. You end up euthanizing animals. You also go through the entire chain. Right now, there are piglets that are being born that are going through the process of preparation for that time period. You can't just put a stop on that until everybody stopped growing, and then we can't keep up with you. What happened was, we had several of our facilities that are the facilities where they actually do the meat processing, that they had a large number of employees that got sick with COVID-19. So they had to shut down the whole facility. So that backs up everything. The price of meat goes up. They're having to euthanize animals in the process. I have already had good conversations with the Secretary of Agriculture. We have two different big issues that are here on the ag side, if you want to be able to track it. One is, we need more facilities. We need more packers in the country. We have a small number of large packers. We need a small number of large packers and a large number of medium and small packers. So we don't get into a situation like this in the future, where if one facility goes down, then we have this massive chain reaction through our supply chain on our food. The problem is, some of the USDA regulations and the cost of standing up a new packer facility is so high now that they can't get one stood up. So we're going to try to work towards, how do we incentivize smaller packers coming into existence, regional packers, so that if we don't lose one in Iowa, then we have this chain reaction all over the whole country. We've got more scattered around different parts of the country, and we can sustain this. Right now, it's a big issue, and it's truly a sad issue. Farmers and ranchers are not raising animals to have them put down. They're trying to put food on people's tables instead. So $3 billion going towards that commodity, to getting it to food banks as fast as we possibly can. In the short term, we are losing some animals, but trying to be able to fix that long term and in the medium term with the turnaround there in those facilities. It's a great question, but it's a tough one to be able to solve in the heat of what we're dealing with right now.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Connor. We'll have just a couple of minutes remaining. We'll go to Joe Robson to ask the Senator our final question. Joe?
Yeah, Senator, of course, the top priority business community right now is how to survive the economic crisis. Can you shed any light on what we can do individually and collectively to help you and help the federal government in opening the economy back up?
So information is extremely important. Testing is extremely important. So anything that you can share with us, with my office, with my team, obviously, you know, Derek, and the folks know him extremely well, who leads our field staff. He does a phenomenal job there in Green Country. So stay in contact with Derek Osborne, share any information you can with us to say this is the situation on the ground. That helps us get the word out, both to the governor's team and to CDC and the task force that's in DC. Right now, everyone is guessing this. Quite frankly, everyone is guessing it. The White House and the task force team have empowered the governors to say specifically, you've got to make decisions based on the data that's on the ground in these regions. They have many fewer cases in Wyoming than what they have in New York. And it's not just based on population, it's based on even percentage. In Wyoming, the percentage of infection rate of COVID-19 has been exceptionally large. As John Barrasso, who's the senator from Wyoming, has said several times, in Wyoming, they've been social distancing for 150 years. They know how to social distance. So they already are separated enough that they just haven't seen the movement of the virus. About 25% of the counties in America have 0 cases of COVID-19 in the county. That includes some of the counties in Oklahoma as well. So the challenges for those businesses and for the states like ours that are seeing a real decline in cases are when they can make that decision. The national media that's focused on New York City, they're going to say the whole country needs to stay down until New York City is caught up. We're going to look at it and we're going to say, no, we can't do that. Now, Louisiana next door may do that very different based on what's happening in New Orleans. That has been a major hotspot for all the South, has been New Orleans in the movement of COVID-19. So Louisiana is going to handle it different than Arkansas and Oklahoma are. It's going to handle it different from Texas when they haven't had a lot of cases, let's say in the Permian area and such. So regionally is the way to go, getting information to us and continuing to do additional testing. The more testing that we do, the more data that we can get. And so for your employees to be able to go in and get tested, for individuals to be able to get tested, it adds more data into the system. Now we're finally at a point where we have tens of thousands of available tests and 80 different mobile sites around the state. And so if individuals feel sick, if they feel like they have any of the symptoms, they can go in. If they're around somebody that has the symptoms, they can go in and get the test. We now also have the antibody test in Oklahoma. They're doing about 2,500 of those a day. That one does take a doctor's prescription to be able to get because they've got to do a blood draw for that one. But you can just call your doctor and to say, I want to get the antibody test. They can send you to a lab. They'll make an appointment. There's no cost for the antibody test, just like there's no cost for the COVID-19 test. The COVID-19 tells you if you have it right now. The antibody test tells you, have I ever had it in the past? And that's for those individuals that think, you know what, I had a little bit of a cold in March, maybe that was COVID-19. They could go get a blood test to be able to find out if that was actually COVID-19 my body has fought it off and I'm on the other way through it. That kind of data and information for people taking those tests helps us get a better picture of how COVID-19 moved through our state and what is currently happening. And that helps us get more data, which helps us in the process.
Senator James Lankford, thank you so much for joining us today. Joe Robinson, thank you for joining us as well. Senator, your leadership has been exemplary. My only thing I would challenge you on is you said something nice about Derek Osborne, and we really try hard at the chamber to never say anything nice about Derek other than he did have a birthday the other day and he's looking awfully good. But we appreciate the work that Derek does, appreciate the work that your team does. You've got a great team, and we thank you for your leadership. Again, I want to thank our gold sponsors, the Cherokee Nation businesses and the Robinson companies, and our silver sponsor, Spirit Air Systems, for their support. To anyone of the 240 that joined the webinar electronically or many others who called in, if you'd like to share this webinar, a recording will be posted on the Chamber's website later this afternoon. Our next business support series webinar will be tomorrow morning, Tuesday at 11 a.m. We'll be joined by Dr. Timothy Young, the Chief Clinical Officer for Ascension St. John, for a 30-minute discussion regarding his analysis on the latest medical trends. You can register for that webinar on tulsachamber.com/events. We'll also host U.S. Senator Jim Inhofe on May the 13th for another virtual congressional forum, very similar to today's with Senator Lankford. Also, our next legislative briefing breakfast will be held virtually on May the 22nd. Please mark your calendars for those. And in closing, if there's anything that our chamber team or I can do to be of assistance to you or your business during these challenging times during the pandemic, please feel free to reach out to us. We're here to assist in any form or fashion as we've done throughout this process. So thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful afternoon and a great week. And again, Senator Lankford, thank you for joining us. Hope your week goes well. Thank you all. Have a fabulous afternoon.